All right, guys, welcome back to Within Tolerance. This is episode 64, and we're joined with Nick from NCCKnives. You should check out his Instagram. We'll be sure to tag that in the Instagram post. But let's just get right into it. Nick, how did you get into manufacturing? Start as far back as you want to present day. Were you into making things and then got into CNC, or how did all this work out?
So the year was 1996. No, I'm joking. When I was a kid, I was no like my parents used to say I like to see where the feet grew out of things. I didn't care I didn't care much about toys. I cared about how the inside of the toys looked, or anything for that matter. I just liked to take things apart and see how things were built. And I didn't know about manufacturing processes back then. I just wanted to see how my toys were built, how my games were built, how anything was built, even the furniture in my house. My dad used to travel, and he used to come home from on long business trips. And by the time he was home, the bed was taken apart, the closet was taken apart, everything, like just in pieces. Uh, and then later on in life, I started figuring out like manufacturing as a possibility and learning about how to make things. And I was messing around with a little bit of woodworking projects and circuit boards and soldering, computer repair, making custom computers, and then eventually I got into knife collecting. And not because I liked knives, oddly enough, but because it was handmade. I was fascinated by the process of making something with your own two hands from start to finish. Because before that, everything I thought had to be made by factories with multi-million-dollar machines. And I saw guys making knives with a few $1,000s in their garage or their basement. And at that point, I started doing my research about custom knives. If I was in New York, so it wasn't a popular topic, or even anything manufacturing wise. People don't even know what a machinist is over here. Back in Jersey, I used to say I am a machinist, and guys would be like, "Oh, cool, you're a machinist," and because they don't know what a knife maker was. And now in New York, they don't know what a knife maker is or a machinist, and I just say I make stuff. That's pretty much it. What's a machinist. I make things out of metal. You see, then I always go. You see that iPhone case? Technically, if I wanted to, I would have made the housing for it, but I don't do that. For the same machine I run, does that. Except I don't have a Speedio. Jealous Dylan. Uh, and so through my research, I found there was a show in Jersey for custom knives, and I went over there and I kind of fell in love with the aspect. But once again, it wasn't the knives that did it for me, like most of these collectors. I just thought that it was cool that the knives were handmade, and I started collecting the knives because, in relation to them being handmade, I was very picky. I picked them apart and took them apart and observed every little chamfer and feature and every little detail of why they did this, how they did this, and I would ask the maker things that I noticed and why they did this, why did they chamfer that, and but I was never happy. I never really found the knife that I wanted. It was something that was always close, but not exactly. And at that point, I was like, I could make things. I had like zero understanding of metalworking. It was just kind of woodworking and circuit boards type of stuff back then. And I was like, I could make this. I have a little bit of space at that time. I live in an apartment building, being that I'm in New York. My landlord gave me a 4x4 foot table in the basement to mess around on, and went to Harbor Freight, bought a couple tools, that 1x30 grinder every knife maker knows about, that $40 drill press, and that was about it. And I kind of started messing around with it with little fixed blades. They never really did it for me because I wanted a folder, and I told myself, well, folders seem complicating. I don't have a mill. Let's try to grind the knives. I essentially made about 120 to 140 knives before I actually finished the knife, because I wouldn't finish it until I was able to do that compound hollow grind you see on my knives these days. And eventually I got it, and I don't know why. This is whoever. So you guys, well, Dylan's not full time. So Payton, you're full time, and you guys always talk about when is the right time to go full time. I ground one knife correctly after 2 years of messing around with it every weekend, and I came home from school one day, like my first year into college, into my college semester, right after high school. I told my mom I am moving out next week to go full time knife maker. I have a shop in the apartment lined up. Mind you, I haven't sold a knife yet.
And how
I
old were
just
you at the
left
time?
going on 18, I guess. I was still 17, so I was out of high school my first college semester.
Okay.
Halfway through the semester, I came home one day. I literally told my parents, so I'm taking a year off. I'm moving to Jersey. I have an apartment. I have a shop lined up. I was renting space at someone else's shop, and I'm out next week. And also in New York, that's unheard of. You usually stay at home till you're like in your mid 20s, You don't move out, especially in a Russian household. Like my parents, like, no, you're messing around. I'm like, no, like it's all set up. First month's rent's paid for the shop and the apartment. I'm out next week. What about school? I'm like, it's not for me. It never was for me. I was that student in school who was hustling and trying to make money more so than doing homework. I had horrible grades. I was a C plus student, but not because I was I wasn't smart. I didn't do any homework or any home assignments. My grades were just based on tests and projects. It's the only reason I graduated. Besides that, I was busy making money. Even in school, I used to make paracord bracelets, and I used to make them. And before they were mainstream, and back then Jordans were popular. People would want to wear them to match their Jordans. They would have multiple sets. I had my entire high school wearing them, and two of my teachers caught on, and they would watch me tie them in class and not pay attention in class because I was busy making money. And one of the teachers was a dean. She would confiscate them, and she would watch me during like reading sessions. And if I wasn't reading, or at least my eyes were pretending to look down, she would start unraveling them with this sick, twisted grin with so much joy. Problem was when she unraveled them, it would wrinkle, and I can't retie them and sell them as a good product. But that was once she started to catch on that I was making money and doing this. She would do this every time we had popcorn reading or whatever. Take these and start unraveling them with a sick, twisted grin.
Oh my god!
Wonder where that was the start at now.
No, she's still at the school. I visit the school once in a while. I actually had to email my Facebook teacher recently to ask for a math formula because I was trying to calculate something for a fixture, but Adam, the machinist, gave me the answer before she did. But then she actually followed up the next day and gave me the right answer. I was trying to do some grinding in the mill, and I needed some help. Adam, the machinist, kind of gave me the exact formula I needed.
Awesome.
But that was essentially the start of my manufacturing career. It was from a young age, and how I went full time with like the stupidest decision of my life. Turned out it worked out, but I don't recommend that. Like I said, I didn't make an actual knife to sell. I had a little over 100 knives, but never actually finished them to the point of where I could sell them. Then I ground one folder that looked kind of right. It wasn't sellable. It looked kind of close to the grind I wanted, and the folder kind of worked. And I was like, okay, let's go full time and figure this out.
So you made that jump and you went full time. What was that first month like?
It's a little hard to remember. It was a little hectic because it was like, okay, well, I still got to learn this,
and you got to make money, right?
Well, yeah, It worked out because I was always hustling since I was like 9 years old, doing odds and ends businesses. When I was in junior high school, I thought I was going to be a computer repair tech because back then it made a lot of money. These days, it's cheaper to just buy a new computer. So through all of high school and junior high, I did computer repair. I did website building and stuff like that. Managed a couple websites in my neighborhood for local stores. I was making pretty good money. I was able to move out and be like, well, I have finances to pay rent for 6 months. So hopefully, if I could figure this out in 3 months, I could make 3 more months. I could have 3 months to make money before I go broke and have to move back home. And I think it was about 4 months before I started making enough money to cover all my expenses, at least. It took me about 2 months to make a knife that I was happy enough to sell. But once I sold it, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I sold that. It's kind of one of those things. I was like, I just kind of need the money. It works. The client was happy because he was local. But like, I still regret selling that knife to this day. And I haven't seen it since. And then for about 2 more months after that, because I regretted so much, I regretted selling that knife. I didn't make another knife to sell for 2 months after. I sat there working on the mechanism of the lock, the detent. And for the guys that don't know, lock is self-explanatory. It just, there's a lever, I guess you'll call it, and it will kick over whenever the blade fully opens. And that'll interface with an angle on the lock face of the blade, of the tang, and it'll pretty much jam together. And that's known as a frame lock. And the detent is the ball that acts as the retention spring to pretty much that tunes how your action would be. That'll depict how much tension you need to keep the blade closed and how much tension how much spring tension the whole knife has. Essentially, it's the bread and butter of a crisp action. It took me a while to figure out what I want for my unique action. Every maker kind of has their unique setup and action. Some guys like stiffer detents. Some guys like softer detents. I like a very stiff and snappy action. So that took me a little while to come up with my formula, and now you kind of have your standard formula for everything you do frame lock wise. You change it a little bit here and there based on the knife size of the knife. Like I have a 2-inch knife. Obviously, the lock bar has to be shorter. Some of the math has to be a little different because the leverage points change. But once you got that going, it was fine. I was like, okay, this is right. This is the new formula I run. I went from there on. Okay, it's like my grinds are still not right, and I'm trying to sell these things at that time for $550. These days, you don't really get a custom for $550. Back then, that was kind of the intro price for any custom folder maker. That was like, can I sell this for $550? You didn't really see anything less, and that was kind of the number. These days, the number is like $650, $7. I see these days. It took me 2 more months. Again, no income. 2 more months. Like, well, I'm almost there. Got to figure this out. Parents calling every day. It's like, did you do it? Did you do it? They're worrying. Like, did you pay your bills? Can you buy food? And I'm like, yeah. The reality was no. I was eating ramen and like pizza almost every day.
Oh my goodness.
I was 17, going on 18. I was like, oh, this is just, I'm like just gonna do this. And eventually, I got it. The second knife I made, and you look at the first and second knife, they were night and day. It was equivalent to makers who are making knives for multiple years, because I just sat there and burned through steel and money, and because I was able to. I didn't have bills. I had bills to pay, but I didn't have a family. I had like so those first 6 months, like I mentioned, I was living with 8 roommates. Essentially, it was
8.
it was like a it was like a trap. It was like 4 bedrooms and 8 roommates. I just lived on the couch in the living room.
Like you were
At
the
one
8th?
point. Yeah, I was on the couch in the living room. It was not the best. 1 bathroom, mind you. Yeah, I forget about that. I think it was like a mental blockout, and like once a year I mention this, and I was like, oh my god, I forgot it. Like those 6 months of my life. That's why when you first asked me that question, I was like, I gotta kind of. I don't remember exactly because I think it was just like a mental block. It wasn't a life, I would say.
Oh my
So
goodness.
back then, were you just like nonstop, like hustling, like day in and day out, trying to figure this out?
Essentially, that was it. 7 days a week, I was there in Jersey. Every other weekend, I would come back home to New York to see the family and hang out with my friends. But those 12 days in between, every day I had to wake up, go to the shop. Now, this is pre-CNC. I was full-time for about 2 years before I knew what CNC was. Eventually, once I figured out that second folder, I bought a Harbor Freight mini mill. And it's that red X2 machine. Guys do conversions on it all the time. I still didn't know about CNC. Like I said, it took me about 1.5 years into being full-time before I even understood what CNC was, because this is before Grimsmo. This is before the only CNC knife makers that did it were still doing it in secret. It was Grimsmo, let's talk about this many times. It was a little bit of a taboo subject for CNC knives in the custom knife world. I think about 1 year into me being full-time, I discovered John Saunders when he was still in his New York City apartment running the TAG. And that's when I was like my first, like, oh, CNC, like he has the same mill I have. Well, he had the TAG, I had the X2. And at that point, I was thinking about converting it. But again, it was a very taboo subject. I didn't know who to talk to. There was no Fusion 360 yet. Or maybe there was, but it was still kind of like no one really knew about it. Because Saunders was definitely not using that. I think he was using Sprue Cam maybe at the time. And all I knew was draft set, which was 2D. I didn't even know how to start 3D. It looked like it was expensive. I didn't know what to do. But my X2, besides that, had every possible upgrade you could have. I had gas pistons, shocks on there to support the head because it was always kind of drooping forward. I screwed on a rigidity plate to the back of it that added like 50, 60 pounds, supported the head. Thing was cutting nice. It had a DRO on it. It was full mods, and I was known in the knife industry. It's like guys are like, how do I make my machine better? I was coming up with very complex fixtures to do what I wanted to do because I didn't have CNC, and also I'm self-taught. Unfortunately, I didn't go to special school like the both of you guys.
Oh
I've been waiting like a week to say this.
Yeah, Dylan.
That's
So I didn't go to special school. I went to New York City high school. So we had nothing, like no machine, no shop class, nothing. The only thing I took from school that I brought into the industry I'm in now is geometry class. So I used to make these really complex fixtures for repeatability. because I was trying to make these mill patterns on the manual mill that didn't look CNC like, but most of the time guys did these kind of one-off patterns, and I would have rotary tables and indexing tables and these fixtures that went onto dowel pins, very similar to CNC fixtures I use these days. But back then I didn't know about it, like how any of this should be set up. It was just I kind of thought about it and how would I do this and how would I repeat it and how would I make the symmetry right, because some guys would do complex patterns on the show side, but back then it was very rare for guys to do complex mill patterns on both the show side and lock side of the knife. Or if they did, it was more of a random mill pattern and not symmetrical. Now, CNC, you can do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. The code, you have CAD to do everything you want. But for us, most knife makers aren't machinists. 95% of us aren't machinists. Most guys, they didn't know how to use DROs to the extent of their ability. Once I figured out the DRO and it came with this half-inch thick handbook, which when I first got it, it made no sense. I'm like, this DRO just looks like an advanced calculator. Why is the handbook the size of a phone book? Eventually, I got into it and I was like, oh, there's a lot you could do with this DRO. Eventually, I figured out the DRO has more than one, coordinate plane. Like the haas has G54, G58. I don't remember what it was called on the DRO, but I was able to set up a coordinate for the rotary table and one for the vise. So I didn't have to re-indicate the rotary table every time, which was a pain in the ass on that small mill. And I started that was pretty much my basics. So when I got into CNC, I already kind of knew this fixture setup. That was, I would say, a talent of mine where I was able to come up with very intricate fixtures to do a lot of cool machine work and make it repeatable. And I kind of reached my limits of what I was able to do with my knowledge. I wanted to go to some machining school. I didn't have the time, nor did I know. There was no part-time programs and no mentors around me. And eventually I met Brian Nadeau, which is Sharp Eye Design.
Oh,
and
nice.
Yeah, he was about 40 minutes away. I used to rent space at a New Jersey Steel Barons, the steel supplier for most of the knife industry. He used to come by there once in a while, and I'd see his knives. And that was my first time I saw someone who was openly talking about using CNC for knives. And at this time, this is when I first started to see Grimsmo. I saw Grimsmo maybe 6 months prior to that. He was not making knives yet. He was doing the paintball stuff. He was anodizing paintball guns, and he was making what I remember the Manix 2 handles in aluminum, and then he was trying to make paramilitary 2 handles, but they were very complex. And at this point, Saunders had a full CNC shop in his garage, or I think he was moving to that first shop in Iowa or Ohio. I don't remember exactly. And this is when but at this point, I was pretty regularly reading up on CNC. I still didn't know how to implement it into my business because I was like, how do I get the money for this? At this point, I was probably 18 years old. I just turned 18. So I don't know how to get the money for this. I'm kind of barely getting by making knives, but I was very slow at it. And I couldn't ever make enough. So I was like, I know if I make more, I will make the money. But how do I do it? Because again, I didn't go to school. Everything I did was kind of just self-taught. And a lot of knife makers were very open with their information. I had a question, they would answer it. I would get stuck, they would answer it. Eventually, I kind of couldn't learn anything else. I kind of mastered how to make the knife I was making. And machining wise, like I said, knife makers aren't experts at machining. So then I kind of reached my limits of machining knowledge as well, to where I was helping out other guys, explaining my fixtures and so on, until I met Brian, and I was like, oh, this is my next step. So he invited me over to go check out his setup because he ran his entire shop and still does out of a one-car garage. His Haas mini mill and whatever else he has in there.
Wow.
So I go out there and we hang out for about half the day. I check out his operation, what he's working on, the quantity of knives he's working on, and I tend to analyze everything I see. Anytime I go into anyone's shop, I analyze everything, down to inventory, fixtures, tooling, inventory of materials, just everything I can. I try to break down, because I do that to this day, even with, because now that I know how things are made, when I see something and I look at it, I'll be like, how was this made? I went to the gym right before gyms closed, and I was looking at something, and this weight, I would see an end mill pattern in it. And I don't know why. It took me a little while to realize that they're over molding these weights with rubber. But as I'm working out, I'm looking at this weight and I'm like, this is a little weird. Why are they machining the rubber after on these overmolds? And eventually I showed them to some CNC guys, and they're like, they're not. It's just the molds are shitty. And then do you see like I don't know the term for it, Payton. You talked about it where it makes like a seam whenever the molds aren't lined up.
Yeah, like it's flashing.
Yeah, it was flashing. So they're like, do you see like a flashing or anything? And I was like, yeah. So no, those are probably just molded parts with shitty molds. And after that, I probably went through every piece of equipment in my gym, trying to see what parts were machined and what parts were molded. And I just always done that. So I go there and I see his entire operation and I kind of analyze everything. I was like, this guy does this in a one car garage, and I knew his output at that time. He just did a big pre-order on knives, and like his pre-order on knives was more than I made in my 1.5 year career. And that was like, he's like, no, it's only a few months of work. I was like, okay. I walked out of there and I was like, this is the next step. I walked out, 45-minute drive home. I do all the math in my head. How much money do I have in the savings? I was about 4 months away from my limit, because I gave myself a year essentially to do this before I had to go back to school. I was like 4 months away from my barricade of like, can I make this a career? I had a certain income goal that I needed to hit. Having really Russian parents, are usually really strict with school, and they're like, look, if you're not making this much money, like you have to move back home. And I was 4 months away, and I was like, look, mom, dad, I need another year from that point. I was like, if I need to get a CNC within the year. I watched this guy, Brian. He had this machine. I think I could do it. I really don't understand it, but I think I can do it. There's information online. At this point, I'm watching Grimsmo make the first Norseman on his Tormach, and he's using a Tormach to do it. He's also self-taught, and I watched Grimsmo's progression. So I kind of saw what the progression looks like from him having the converted machine to having the Tormach and making knife specific. I saw Saunders. He was a little bit more advanced at that point. He had the Tormach in the other shop. I think he was with his grandfather or father at the time there. I don't know if you guys followed him that far back, but so I was watching these guys progress, specifically Saunders and Grimsmo, so I kind of understood what the learning curve would look like. So I was like, 12 months, this machine has to be in the shop or earlier, and the goal to do that is I have to design every single thing down to the fixture and the speeds and feeds and everything, tabs, screws, in Fusion. Because Brian told me, he's like, look, 80% of it is in Fusion or in whatever CAD software you use. He was using EdgeCam, I think. And then the last 20% is your fixture design and just hitting the green button on your machine. Setting up is pretty simple. You could figure that out really quick. It's all these buttons, half of it's a keyboard, and the rest of it just are features that usually don't work in your haas anyway. That's how I looked at it. I was like, well, if I design everything down to the speeds and feeds in this machine, that means I could run the machine no matter if I've never touched this machine. And 9 months later, I had a haas in the shop.
Jeez. That's
crazy.
crazy.
I think I was right after I don't even remember if I turned 19 yet or not. See, my little, because that 6 month, let's call it the dark age period, where I was living on the couch and like not really making anything, like learning still. My time's a little skewed. So like I knew I got the machine February 18th, and I think it was 4 years ago or 5 years ago. I don't remember if this February was 4 or 5 years. Actually, no, I just saw someone. So I got a few followers after you guys posted my thing, like machinist guys. So it was 2016 of February was when I got that haas.
That's crazy.
And yeah, it's been 4 years now with that thing. Still the same haas. It's never broken. And I just bought a second identical machine last week.
So yeah, let's talk about your machinery. What do you have in the shop now?
So at the moment, I don't have the second one yet. So I was telling you guys in the beginning, I bought it at a whim. I was not actually looking to buy another haas. I told myself I will not buy another haas minimill. It's taken me a while to buy another machine, mainly because I've been trying to move out of New York for a while. I was looking to do it at the beginning of this year, and then COVID happened. I'm trying to get out to PA to have a bigger shop, and I pretty much want a home shop scenario. So I could run the CNCs on my days off and just kind of come in with bigger fixtures. And also commute to work is about 30 minutes through some of my shops in Brooklyn, the shops in Staten Island. So I got to commute 30 minutes, sometimes an hour if the traffic is bad, usually when college semester is on. And I have to also cross a $19 toll bridge every day. So when you go out there for a full days of work, it's not bad. But like if I have to go out there for like an hour or two because I forgot something, or like I forgot like I need to ship a job shop thing out or really quick or some little thing, it's like I got to go out there and it's going to cost me about $20 for the toll and then like $6 in gas. So little quick things suck. So it took me a little while to buy second CNC, even though I needed it. I was like, I don't want to take a loan. I want to buy it again because the last machine I bought out, it was a 2006 Haas minimill. It was 11 years old at that time, basic, and that wasn't the plan either. I was wanted to take a loan for it, but whenever I went to go sign the papers, the loan said something about machining background and references. And I told them, I was like, well, you guys didn't ask me this when I was initially filing for the loan. They're like, oh no, when you do the paperwork, we need to know. I was like, I don't have any. I didn't go to any schools. I didn't apprentice anywhere. Well, he's like, oh, we have to recalculate your rates. And the rate went up from like 5% to 18% because I had to get insurance with the machine.
Jeez.
And I was like, well, I'm not going to pay 18% on this loan. That sounds like that's insane. Like I might as well put the machine on the credit card at that point. And so I just bought the machine out. And again, there was another 6-month dark age period because I just literally burned through my entire funds. And I was kind of through that point again. I was like, oh, I got a ration, get through 6 months. And wow, I forgot about this. Like I said, like there's like these 2 6-month periods where I kind of like mentally blocked out of my mind. The first batch of knives I made was the remainder of the money I had, and all 35 knives were bad parts I machined.
Oh no!
Yeah, it wasn't an easy progression. I machined them wrong, and something with facing them. I didn't understand tolerances, so I got into CNC not understanding that if you tell the machine to cut an 1/8-inch bore, it's not going to be an 1/8-inch bore. I didn't know end mills don't come 1/8 inch if they say they're 1/8 inch. I didn't know there's run out. Like this is how I started CNC, not understanding any of this. So I cut all these parts and they're good, but I also didn't know this was the dead of winter in Jersey. I didn't know about the temperature, and once the machine warms up, it starts changing. So the first parts weren't good, second parts weren't good, third parts, or until I got everything dialed in, which took me a little while because I didn't know things don't just cut exactly the same. And the machine warms up and starts cutting different numbers, and at that point, I stopped checking the parts. So let's say parts 15 to 20, when the machine warmed up, didn't work again because the bores were too big or too small, wherever it was at that time. And once I fixed that, I think an end mill broke, and I changed the end mill. But then again, I didn't know end mills weren't an 1/8 inch, and everything was cutting an 1/8 inch bigger. I didn't know I had to check the parts again if I changed the end mill. Like I didn't know any of this. It was a horrible 3-month trial and error until I figured out everything I had to account for. I didn't know titanium warps really badly. I thought if I faced the parts, everything will be dandy. But when I faced the parts, I was having like 10th warp that I had to bend and straighten out. None of this, like no one told me any of this. Brian didn't tell me any of this. Obviously, he can't tell me everything. But I kind of went into it after buying this machine and spending all my money very blindly. Don't recommend any of this. Like, if anyone hears this story, it's all how you don't go full time. This is like not. This is not how you do things. But 4 years later, I'm still making it work. So I did something great at some point in those 4 years.
Oh man, that's crazy though.
Mm-hmm.
What a start.
I'm assuming you guys took it a little bit more carefully. Well, Dylan still has a job.
Yeah, I definitely am taking it a little more carefully.
Send it. Send it.
That was pretty much, well, that's how I've always been. For me, it was always just do it, except these last 2 years. I haven't progressed. I would honestly say I've been in the shop in New York for just over 3 years, and I haven't progressed at all in 2 years. And that isn't good either. I finally decided to progress during the time where it's not the best time to progress with COVID and uncertainties. But I started getting very stagnant, and I started losing motivation for what I'm doing. And at that point, I didn't like it. I've always been someone who's liked to do, like I said, I always like to know where things grew out of. Things were getting very monotonous. I've been making the same model for a long time because all the fixture was made. I got lazy because I didn't want to design all new fixtures and figure all the stuff out again and do all the CAD work from scratch. And I'm like, this isn't working anymore. I need another machine. I need to put a fire under my ass. I got to go spend some money. And I'm looking at new machines. And that's how I was getting to the second machine. Is originally I was going to buy the Fanuc Robo Drill because I couldn't figure out how to do one piece flow with 10 tools. I know Grizz was talking about he needs 30 tools to do one piece flow.
Mm-hmm.
I got it down to 18 with my setup. Uh, like one piece flow is pretty important. I don't need exactly one piece flow, but if I could do the handles simultaneously insides and outsides, that'll help a lot. Because right now, my dad works with me full time. He's been working with me full time for the last year, and it's been very hard. There's been a lot of ups and downs because if I have no parts, it takes about a month to have knives to assemble with 10 tools on one spindle. Because there's the blades take about a week to do about 60, and then the insides of the handles take about a week for op one, and then the outsides take another week. And then I still have to make the little backspacer that goes in the middle of the handle and the pocket clip. The pocket clips, they could be done later. You don't need those to start assembling the knives. But if I don't have work for him for those 3 weeks to a month, I kind of pay him to do almost nothing. Clean the shop, build me a table, some bullshit work, which that's just burning through money. And at this point, I was like, I got to fix this. It's been getting very monotonous. I've been losing motivation for what it is that I do. And I love working for myself. It's either I have to figure it out or I'm a sink. And it's not that my business was dying. Business was great, but I haven't progressed in 2 years. It was kind of the same as it was 2 years ago. And it was getting boring. I was like, you know what? Let's go buy another machine. Let's expand. Let's get closer to this one piece flow thing so I could do new things. And I go to buy this robo drill, and I was like, okay, I know my credit's good now. I have the money. I could get a loan. I couldn't do this last time because I didn't have any history of machining, and my credit was very new. So I go get this loan, and 2 months ago, because of COVID, the loan requirements went up a lot, and then they're barely giving out any loans because no one's paying their loans back. So I couldn't get a loan. I was about to give up on that whole scenario. And then I listened to your episode. This was the main reason why I contacted you guys to get on the podcast, was because I listened to your episode with Kelvin. And when I listened to him talk about how he did it, he's like, just do it by the machine and figure it out. I don't know why, but that as I'm listening to that episode, that Haas popped up that I just purchased, and I told myself I'm not going to buy another 10 tool machine. But the guy wanted it gone because he bought a UMC 500 and he needed this Haas minimill gone, and it was $12,000. I was like, for $12,000, I could buy that cash right now, and it'll make me money within 24 hours of it being in my shop because it's single phase. I could run the electric myself. I have extra Cat 40 tools. I have an extra vise. I have extra coolant. I have extra oil. I just have to get it here, and it'll make me money in a day. Instead of the robo drill, that was a lot more money. The robo drill, I needed a 3-phase converter for it. I needed to move it with a bigger forklift because it didn't move with a pallet jack and a small forklift like the mini mill does. I was like, that thing will make me money for a month, and it's a little risky shelling out all that cash and not getting a return on investment for a month, considering COVID could come back any moment now, and shit could shut down again, especially being in New York, how bad it was the first time.
Wow. Well, good for you, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a steal.
I just went on a little bit of a tangent there, but
no, that's super cool. Like it's so cool for us to hear like that something we did had any impact on anybody, let alone something that big. So
that day I hit up Payton, I hit up Kelvin too, and I told you, I'm like, thank you, man. Like I said, I would say I was doubting myself for the first time in my life, pretty much. Like I said, when I went first full time, I didn't even doubt myself. I came home from school, I had no business plan, nothing, and I was like, I'm moving out, I'm going to go do this. Never really ever doubted myself, and that was the first time I was hit with self-doubt because of COVID. I had a sales drop for the first time ever doing this. All of April was pretty bad because everyone thought the post office will close,
right,
and that was the first taste of me things not selling in my entire career. And that put a little bit of self-doubt in me. And sales picked up again, and things were fine. And then I have a lot of family that works in the healthcare industry. And they were talking about prep for October. It's going to get bad again. And I'm not a whole person who really, like, a lot of guys really into the whole COVID thing, conspiracy theories, whatever it was. I just know in April, things got really bad here in New York. And I was worried about that happening again. And at that point, I was trying to expand. And I was like, well, if I shell all this money out because I'm trying to buy these machines for cash, and I won't have my cash saved, like my little cash nest egg sitting to get me through it like it did last time, what's going to happen? And I started self-doubting myself. I'm like, everything I said, I need this machine. Everyone told me it's like, you needed this machine last week because there's like, I'm trying to make some new models and expand and again, get past this stagnant period because I haven't progressed in 2 years. And I just kept talking myself out of it when everyone else is telling me you need this machine. I don't know. That episode after I listened to Kelvin talking, for some reason, he's a happy motivational guy, and I saw that machine pop up, and I called the guy. I was like, "Hey, can you do me a favor and check the backlash?" Because it was a 2001 machine, but it only had 5,000 hours on it, and it was an aluminum cutting machine. As everyone knows, everyone says that they're aluminum cutting machine. Uh, but he has 15 Haas mills, and he does gun parts, and I could see the parts he does. It probably was majority of the time running aluminum, and he checked the backlash for me on video, like I asked him to. It was like 3/10 in Y and 4/10 in X for a 19-year-old machine, and Haas's are guaranteed within 2/10. That's pretty much the same number as my machine is showing. So I was like, you know what? For 2001, thing looks clean. It's basic, so the older controller doesn't really affect me in any way because my Haas is basic as well. And I was like, okay. I looked at the video. I'm like, can you show me a video of the spindle spinning? He ramped it up 1,000, 2, 3, 4 to 6,000 RPMs. Sounded great. I think it sounded a little better than mine. The paint was all still intact, which it could be very deceiving, but I always look at the paint first for some reason. And I literally thought about it for not even 10 seconds. I was like, check is on the way. I didn't even negotiate with the guy. I was like, for 12 grand, I'm like, the same machines were for sale at the time on eBay for 17,000, 16,000. I paid 22,000 for mine. I just knew if I wait an hour or two, that machine could be gone. I literally got it 20 minutes after he put it on eBay. I didn't even negotiate with him. I was like, check's on the way.
Wow. That's awesome.
That's really cool.
And it kind of, I don't know, it helped me with that hump I was dealing with, that self-doubt and the little stagnant period I had. And now I've been home for about a week designing new stuff to CAD work. I was like, this machine needs to make me money within 3 days of it being in the shop.
Yeah, well, like you said, I mean, between the two machines, you should be able to do almost one-piece workflow. So that's fantastic.
Well, I'd at least be able to do, instead of a month, it'll be about a week or so from nothing to assembly. And that's amazing. Just that, even that little stagnant period, one machine could do handles and one machine could do blades. Or essentially, so the process was, one of the questions were the flow. Everything starts with the blades. First, the blades get machined, and like I said, it takes about a week. And I do in-house machining because it's part of the process. And it costs more money to do it in-house than ship it out. Because electric here is expensive in New York. Making those foil packets take a while, and you always cut yourself. Shipping it out costs like $2.60. But doing it in-house, my electric bill costs as much as shipping it out, plus the labor.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I heat treat once a month, and if I skip out on heat treating that once a month, my bill is about $150 cheaper that month.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's a 220 volt oven, pretty much, that goes to 2,000 degrees. So it's essentially just like keeping on a heat gun the whole time. Like, people know heat guns are pretty expensive if you run them all day.
Yeah, no thanks.
Wow.
Yeah, or like running an electric heater essentially, because it's essentially that's $140. It's not like I'm heat treating a whole week. That's 2 full days of 12-hour shifts of heat treating. That's $140 on the electric bill.
Jeez.
Yeah, so if I send them out, it's about the same money, but the process they do when you send stuff out with, they don't plate quench. So I don't know, some machinists are familiar with heat treat process. Essentially, with the stainless steels I use, it's about 1950. You hold it for about 10 minutes, and then you pull them out, and then you plate quench them with 2 aluminum plates, because you have to get them under 200 degrees and however many seconds that steel calls for. And because I plate quench, I count on my process straightening out my blades in the quench. And they don't plate quench, they air quench. So it won't straighten out my blade lengths. So that's the only reason. Yeah, that used to not be the process I used to send out, but because I mill my bevels partly in the machine, so that way I don't have to use the first course belt. I mill my blades are 5/32 stock, and I mill my bevels down to about 40 thou on the edge, and then I grind the rest of the way by hand. That's just so that way the first belt, it's very messy. You're not actually shaving the metal. Your 36 grit, 60 grit ceramic belts, they throw chips at your face.
Oh,
You have to wear a mask. You have to wear glasses. It's messy. It's dirty. I just hate it. So I milled through that, but that makes the blades warp heavily. You're removing a lot of metal from these. Knife steels have a lot of stress in them, just like titanium, because especially what I'm using is cold rolled. So they warp, and I compensate by my process. Essentially, everything is in the process. Uh, every part that I hold, I make sure that they're clamped flat in multiple positions. So as I'm machining it, it's always flat. And I've actually assembled my knives pre-heat treat, and sometimes they don't work because they're too warped. And once you heat treat them, it'll actually straighten everything out again. But the nice part about heat treating is my dad could do that. I taught him to do that. And I think I trusted him to do it, even though it's a very scientifically careful process because you're dealing with 2,000 degrees. And if you drop the blades or you don't do it fast enough, you don't get a good blank. I think it's because Grimsmo had his father-in-law do it. I was like, well, his father-in-law did it, so I think my father could do it. So I think that was straight up the correlation there. But he does it, and he makes the packets really well because he was a tailor. I hate making the packets. It's kind of a sin. It's kind of the bane of every knife maker's existence. The joke in our industry is it's kind of impossible to make it without cutting yourself. You're essentially working with 2 thou steel foil that has pretty much a constant burr through the entire thing.
Jeez, yeah, that doesn't sound like any fun.
Yeah, so the blades get machined first. So once the blades come off, they're soft, and my dad could start heat treating. So that gives him work to do for about 2 to 3 days. While he's heat treating them, I could start machining the frames. Now with two machines, I could machine the interior on one machine and then pull them out from one machine and put them into the second machine and do the exterior. So now there's only that 1 week lag until the blades are made. And now with this, I'll probably make extra blades. So if I'm doing a batch of 60, I'll probably make like 80 blades and then 60 handles. And then for the next time I do that batch, I already have 20 blades set up. So there's not this week of stagnant. If there's already blades made, it'll be like a 2-day stagnant period. This is all theoretical until that machine is here. But this is how I do it now with the backspacers and clips. I always make like an extra 20 clips and backspacers because they're a pain to make. They're paint to fixture. They take as much time to make as the handles do, believe it or not, and they're tiny. It's because they're small. But I make those ahead of time, usually from the last batch, so that way I don't have to add another week into that stagnant period until parts are ready. So now if I do that with my blades too, I should technically no longer have stagnant periods with those two machines.
That's awesome. How exciting.
Theoretical. Yeah, I'm very, like I said, once I bought, I don't know why, but that day when I listened to that episode, I was like, yeah, let's get that machine. Ever since then, I'm not a person that has depression or I've never self-doubt. I've never had self-doubt until COVID hit and I had that 1 month of sale, drop in sales. And I don't know, it just did something to me. I was very doubtful about buying another machine if something happens again. At this point, I was like, I bought that machine and just all the doubt went away.
Awesome.
So with all that being said, in the knife industry, what is your favorite part about it and what's your least favorite?
Favorite part, it's not the industry. Like I tell guys all the time, I'm a knife maker and I've always said I was a knife maker. These days I've been saying I am a machinist. I think I found my calling in not being a knife maker, but I think my calling is in just making things. Like I was saying as a kid, I just like to make things. So my favorite part of the industry is just that I get to make something. It has nothing to do with knives these days. If I thought I could make money doing guns, I'll go do that or whatever it is. I'm good at making knives. I figured it out at this point. So that's what I do. My least favorite is they're not easy to make. They're all very unique, individual. They're all pretty, like every time I make a knife, there's always an issue. They never really go together perfectly. And you have to troubleshoot every single knife. And which is why it's very hard to make in-house production knives. For you to make in-house production knives, you need to have everything double disc ground. Everything has to get lapped. Essentially, you guys see how Grimsmo makes stuff.
Yeah.
It's not, there's no way to do production knives cheaply. There's a lot of stuff that has to get done prior to even machining stuff. The parts have to be de-stressed. I started de-stressing my titanium before I machined it because like when I first started making stuff, they would warp on me heavily. When I faced them, I would take off 2 thou and I'd get like 10 thou warp.
That's crazy.
Yeah, good luck with that, Dylan. I heard you were saying you're going to start doing some titanium machining.
Yeah, so far the milling has not been an issue, but drilling tiny holes has been no fun.
How are you drilling them?
I've tried every way possible. I think I just had some shitty drills, so I'm
I
waiting on
use the
some new
circuit board drills. That's all I use.
ones. You're the second person that said that. Yeah, so I'm waiting on some different
I
carbide
find that
drills.
they're sharper because they're meant to cut fiberglass, so they're more polished.
Huh. Well, maybe I'll get some of those ordered up too then. Give them a shot.
Yeah, and I peg drill everything like 5 thou depth of cut, pecking at like really fast rates,
Really?
full RPM. Yeah,
Huh.
I get a little bit of issues with bird nests once in a while, depending on the size of the drill bit, but I've never had like traditional like no speeds and feed calculators from any supplier, any of that. For all the stuff that I drill is under an 1/8 inch. I'm drilling 55 thou right holes on every part.
Yeah, these
And
are
I just
70
back drill.
thou holes, and I'm 5 broken drills deep at this point, but I'm
I,
starting to
I'll,
think that the Walter, or not the Walter, Goering drills were just garbage for this.
like yeah, the 55 thou drill in my drill right now has machined about 300 holes. I think it's still going
Dylan, you got to talk
at
to this
530 second.
guy.
At
Yeah.
530 deep. It's just funny when I talk to a lot of machinists. So like I was always the reference to a lot of knife makers for machining, and I want to talk to you guys because I don't really talk to machinists and get to nerd out about it. But when I listen to machinists talk, they're always like, "Oh yeah, the titanium. This is insane materials. It's bane my existence, and aluminum is great." But I'm like, I suck at machining aluminum. I don't know how to do things fast. Like I had aluminum job shops to do for the first time last year, and like I lost money because I didn't know how to cut it right.
Yeah, I was talking to Brad Southard a lot because he's local to me, and he was saying the same thing. He's like, I've broken more tools in aluminum than I have in titanium, and I'm like, man, I wish I had that problem right now.
Yeah, I think I've become too much of a hero machining aluminum to where I'm like, oh, this is so much softer than a titanium, and then like I'll take too big of a cuts and get chip welding or like clogging, and like I'll just break shit.
That's funny. Yeah, I'll have to try those circuit board drills because my customer also recommended that that's what he uses as well, and so.
Mhm.
I mean, I tried like more and less surface foot, more and less chip load, different pecs, everything, and they would last maybe 8 or 9 holes and then break.
Wow, no. The other drill bit that I haven't so I have 3 drill bits kind of always in there for my handles. So 55 thou, 112 thou, and 79 thou, no 78 thou, and I honestly I never break them. I just eventually chip them because I'm not storing my tools right, or I just kind of need it. I need to pull it out of the CNC because I know I'm not going to need it for a little while, and I don't have any more to run by like manually, and then that's when I break them. I haven't broken one in the CNC in years. I'll just retire them at some point because it'll start putting a little bit too big of a burr or something for the entry. I don't have a standard speeds and feeds for it. It's always just kind of gun drill it or back drill it and like about 5 thou depth of cut. 4 to 7 inches a minute, depending on the size, and just like a 10-inch retract, and just all the way through it. Like, what? How deep is the hole you're trying to do?
190, I think, is the final depth.
Oh, that should be simple. I do 3/16 pretty much all the time with the 79 one specifically doing 3/16 the backspacers.
Yeah, you're echoing pretty much what everybody has told me. I tell them in my speeds and fees, and they're like, "Yeah, that should work," and I'm like, "Yeah, well, it's not because I just broke my fifth drill." Like,
when I first started, that's when I was breaking them because I was going off the calculators and I used I haven't used G Wizard in like 2 years because I'm machining the same parts in just different forms. So I just have my templates at this point. Like I said, I haven't been pretty stagnant for the last 2 years because the job shop work that I do is similar to the stuff that I do for myself. So I just kind of use my templates for mostly all that. But the second machine, it only half that spindle time is going to be dedicated to keeping up with my production. The point of it was, it's not the machine I wanted. It's only 10 tools still, so I can't do what I wanted anyway. It was just so cheap that I was like, honestly, I just need this to get past the self-down point. It's cheap enough. It'll make me money within 24 hours. and it was so cheap that I'm like, if I move next year, I could sell it and still break even after transportation costs, or make some money on it.
Yeah,
So I'm
totally.
like, even for a year, like it's fine. This machine, like I just need it in here. But half that time on that machine is going to be for R&D, for new projects, prototyping. I have a goal that I want to do. I want to try to do in-house automatic knives, and that's
Oh, cool.
aluminum. And that's going to be my first venture into production aluminum milling. Problem is, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to optimally mill aluminum for speeds and feeds. I'm going to have to
Feel,
mess around with that.
feel free to reach out because I got that under wraps for the most part, but
Yeah, that's why I wanted the robo drills, more RPMs. But I'm like, if I could just at least get there to there at some point. But I'll have to figure that one out. And then I want to mill. I mean, I want to start grinding my bevels in the mill.
oh,
And
cool.
I've never done any of that. Adam the machinist was kind of giving me some tips, but I have to buy this CBN wheel. It's like $900. So I've never been.
Ooh.
I've been wanting to do this for like 2 years, but it's like $900 to get the CBN wheel, and then it's probably gonna be at least a week of R&D. And I've had no time to do a week in R&D. Like I'm at my shop's in New York City. My overhead's ridiculous. I have no time to just mess around.
Yeah, so how did that happen? Like, how did you go from New Jersey to like Brooklyn? Like, that seems like
Well,
such a bizarre
no,
change.
I grew up in Brooklyn. I left Brooklyn because I couldn't afford a shop here when I first went full time. I was offered a sublet in Jersey and a knife shop already. So that was the thing. I told my parents, I came home one day and I was like, "There's another knife shop in Jersey that I speak to regularly, and they offered me a little bit of space to get going." And I
Oh,
was roommating with the guys that work in that shop.
that makes more sense.
Yeah, and so I was like, the goal was always to come back to New York. I wasn't 21 either, so like I had the essentially the same. I was teased my entire time like Payton is, because like everyone I hung out with was in their late 20s and 30s, and like I couldn't go out to bars. I was going to Blade Show for 4 years before I turned 21. Well, no, 3 years. So I'm watching everyone get hammered. Oh, I was still drinking with them, but like they would give me the beer as they would make fun of me for not being able to have the beer.
Oh my goodness.
So that was like my thing. And then like I went to Blade Show for 7 years now. Half of them I wasn't 21. And when I turned 21 4 years ago or 3 years, I don't even know how old I am. I started going to the USN show because I couldn't go to that one because I couldn't stay at the hotel if I wasn't 21.
Wow.
That's
You're
the one in
telling me all
Vegas.
my pains here. IMTS got to find that hotel that you could be 18 to check in.
Oh, Payton, I fully understand you. I used to like ask guys, I'm like, hey, can like you book the room for me?
Yep.
Because like I'm not like I wasn't 18 and there were some hotels that were 21. Like I feel you. Remember, I went full time at 17. That sounds like we could probably relate. Well, I don't want to keep talking about my story. I'd like to just kind of nerd out about some machining stuff for a little bit.
Sure.
So I was talking to Payton, like we're gonna make fun of probes. So I don't have a probe in my machine.
Yeah.
So I fully no. I think Payton should have a probe.
Oh
So
my
so,
god.
no,
We're back to special
because
Oh, that
people.
backfired. That backfired real quick.
turns on you. No, but I don't think it's a. So like I was telling Payton, I was on a phone call with a knife maker looking to get it to CNC this morning. I told him he really wanted a DT machine and a probe, and like I'm like honestly, what you want to do, it's way too much machine for what you want, and then you want a fourth on there. I'm like that machine. This guy Payton has one. He has issues with table load. You're probably gonna have issues with table load because that fourth isn't gonna be permanently for your setup. He wants it just for one thing. I was like, you're gonna have to take it on and off. You're gonna need a crane or type of setup because they're not that light. Because he wants a probe with a tombstone on it, a trunnion. I mean,
Mhm.
like you have to think about this. I mean, you're not thinking this through. If you really want that big of a machine with that capability, he's trying to do fixed blades. Maybe a DM1 or a VF2 is better, but honestly, it's your first machine. You're in California. Haas's are a dime a dozen on the used market. You could probably find a Haas minimill, get going with it. You have a single phase in your shop. You don't have to worry about three-phase conversions. You don't need a bigger forklift. It moves with a pallet jack. And you wanted a probe, and I'm like, you're trying to do this one type of knife very well, which is what I do, and you don't need a probe. It just you set up your table to where you have the same, pretty much the Pearson method. I have everything on G58 is off of my pallet system, and everything dovetails into that system, and everything works off of the same G58 coordinate,
Mhm.
and all my Z's are off the same location as well. So anything that works on the pallet fixture has the same offsets. I don't have to do anything on it. The same half the tools are usually in there. I have to set up some tools, but if the next 4 jobs are all on pallets, all my tool sets are the same. That's kind of why I don't need a probe, and I don't think it's for everybody. But Payton, you are a job shop. You should have a probe.
I agree.
Oh my god.
I lied to him. I texted him. I was like, "Hey, we could talk shit on Dylan, saying that like probes, people don't need probes."
No comment.
No, but I do want a probe. But when I bought the machine used for $22,000, I couldn't justify a third of the cost to get a probe in there.
Totally. Yeah.
It would be nice because I didn't have this set up for the first year and a half. I have the machine for 4 years. So essentially, since I only have a small working envelope, it's 16 by 12, which is not big enough for what I do. But like I said, I don't know any better. So what I have is what I have, and it works. Essentially, I have a 6-inch vise under sideways that I only has 4 inches of working area on, which is enough because it's just for soft gel parts for Op 1 on my handles and Op 1 stuff for roughing from water jet parts.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have a permanent pallet that permanent like 4-inch thick piece, 4-inch by 8-inch by 12-inch aluminum chunk on there. So it's the same height as my vices. And that doesn't move. That thing went on the machine 2 years ago, and it's bolted in there permanently because all my fixtures I've made in the last 2 years, I'm afraid to move it and indicate it in, and everything I've already made will be off by a thou or two. And I made it properly to where I could remove it, but I'm afraid to remove it.
Yeah, I don't blame you if it's working.
All my stuff has like 3,000, 4,000 chamfers on it, and like if the fixture is off by a thou or two, like you'll see it.
Oh yeah, you.
So I have really tight tolerances to keep on the flip. So in that sense, like I don't need a probe. Anything on the pallet's always G58. I never XY that. Anything on the soft jaws, I cut those fresh. I have a Heimer. I never use the Heimer because I coordinate G54 on the soft jaws with the chamfer tool that's in the machine. I just kind of do it by eye because I cut it fresh. Yeah, I just cut it fresh every time, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I can see that for sure.
I just get it by eye close to the corner, so I know that like I'm not gonna blow out the side of the soft jaw. And besides that, I have the Heimer, but I don't really use it. My setups are pretty quick. On job shops, once in a while, I wish I had a probe because I hate doing setups. I also wish I had a probe because I could do more things with my machine. In the second machine, I'm gonna do what I originally wanted to do on this one. I just didn't have the money for it. I could do the identical setup I do now, with the same coordinate with an orange vise. At the time, I didn't have the money for it, and I had that giant chunk of aluminum.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense.
So once I recoup some of the cost on this, I'll get an orange vise on there and pretty much make a 12-inch by 16-inch version. And everything is tapped for 1032 or 1024 shoulder bolts. I think 3/4 on center. Also, that was all manually tapped, and it was the worst decision of my life. It was 190 hand tapped holes in aluminum. Yeah. I was afraid to break a tap in there, so I just kind of hand tapped it all. But I used a hand drill with a form tap, so it took a few hours, and then at that point I had like carpal tunnel in my wrist for a week or two. It wasn't good. I couldn't grind blades for a bit. I was like, oh, this is not bad. Like of the first few, I'm like, after number 50 of keeping the wrist at that angle with the hand drill, it started to hurt bad. I kind of just took a block and drilled a hole in it as a guide for 90 and just in and out.
Oh my goodness, that's crazy.
Again, I'm self-taught in everything I do. I don't know how to rigid tap in the machine. I don't understand the math for it. I haven't looked at it. Yeah, but I haven't looked at it in 2 years. So like I said, I haven't done anything new and crazy in 2 years on the machine. Just because I have the process, it works, and I just in and out, keep doing that.
If you do one more fixture like that by hand, I'll buy a probe.
Great. So that orange vice fixture is going to be twice as many holes. It'll probably like 400 hand tap holes.
Oh my goodness.
So that's like $2 a hole or what? No, that's like $10 a hole that I'm spending.
No, at this point, I'll buy a thread mill and thread mill all those.
There you go.
No, well, these days I thread mill 440 like every day. And I was going to talk about that. One of the questions that people were asking was what do I do special to machine Timascus?
Yeah. One of
And
my Hetch's questions was if you wanted
I
to
don't
know
really
about machining exotic materials.
I don't really do anything special with those. I just do essentially when I do a batch, I cut like a couple titanium parts. Then once I know all my offsets are good, almost like to get everything to tolerance. And once all that's set, and I know I don't have to change the tolerance to adjust for all the end mills and everything anymore, I'll cut like 2 or 3 to make sure it's cutting consistent. And while the end mills are still fresh, then I'll cut the Timascus or the zirconium parts. And all I do special is set the feed rate to 50%, just so that way it's a little bit more polished, so it's less sanding time after. Because all that Timascus and all that has to be taken to a full near polish.
Right. That makes sense.
So I'll do all that. But it was a lesson that I learned. It was a hard lesson I learned in the beginning. I used to break a lot of thread mills when I used to work on exotics because I didn't really think if I set my feed rate to 50%, it'll change the interpolation of the thread mill. And I was breaking thread mills for a while, not knowing why. And then one day, it kind of just hit me. It's like, oh, if the machine is moving slower, it's not moving at the speed of the pitch as it's pulling out the Z. With the RPMs matching with the movement or some shit. And it took me a little while to figure that out. And it was pretty expensive at first. Every time I was doing exotics, I just kept breaking thread mills. I'm like, damn, this Timascus doesn't like to be thread milled. I guess it's because it's using 3 different alloys of titanium. And it took me a little while to figure that one out.
Huh. It still should work at a different feed rate. I wonder if you were just work hardening the titanium.
That doesn't really happen unless the coolant leaves.
You're still feeding up the same helix, so it shouldn't matter. It's not like a tap where, like, if you slowed it down, it would break.
But the RPM is still the same as it was prior. Doesn't the RPM matter in the feed of the thread mill?
Just as far as feeds and speeds, but not. Well, are you single pointing or are you multi pitch?
It's multi-point. Sorry.
Oh, so yeah, that would screw it up.
Yeah, it was multi-point because the first things I was doing was single pitch, and then
no, it still should be. You're still going up the same pitch though, so it still shouldn't matter. Yeah, now that I think about
it, they break every time. I thought the feed rate really mattered. Thinking about how in my head how it's cutting, because since it's spinning around, I thought the feed rate and the spindle speed had to be like coherent to each other.
Yeah, no, they're not linked at all. It's not like tapping at all, so it shouldn't matter. But that's really interesting.
But yeah, it happened every time. Every time I'm running a thread mill and I override my feed rate, I always break it.
Huh. That's bizarre.
So I thought that was the reason. I thought the RPM and that, because I remember when I first started thread milling, it took me a little while to get I think I broke like 6 of those thread mills until I got it right. Because at that time I didn't know how to use the calculators websites provided.
Right.
Like I said, I still don't. Like honestly, I don't. So when I'm talking to someone about like speeds and feeds, I need it given to me in RPM and IPM, like inch per minute and revolutions per minute, or they'll be like SFM, and I'm like, I don't know what that means. Like as far as the speeds and feeds, I don't know how to convert it when they give me SFMs.
Oh man, we got to get you a good speed and feed calculator webpage.
Yeah. Oh, I said I used to use GWizard, but now it's all been the same stuff because I have the templates. But again, like I'm self-taught, and even now when I talk to machinists and I talk to them like how I do things, half of it doesn't make sense. And I'm like, I get the end result, and then I'm usually using half the amount of tools most guys use. And I think that's just from my manual machining days, where it's like these are the tools I have at hand. I got to get it to work.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, the fact that you can get it done with that like few tools is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think my handles the insides are 8 tools, and there's a lot of features, and the outsides are exactly 10 plus 1. Essentially, just like if I'm doing 3D milling features or flat milling features, I have to just change out 1 tool for a ball nose. But everything I do is always 10. The only thing I ever have to do that's 10 plus 1 is when I'm doing the outsides of my handles, and like if I'm trying to get unique with the mill patterns, because I offer way too many options. That's why I usually break stuff when I get the plus 1. The most common thing I crush, like I've been wanting a research brush for the longest time because I run it on all my titanium parts. but I don't have one. I use a $12 version because I crash it like every other month because it's usually my 11th tool. It's
Oh,
those 3M rotor locks or Rolox.
mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with those or so. Brian showed me them, and he's like, they're $12. Just take the arbor and take the head and just epoxy them together, or else they come apart at the RPMs we use them at. And because they're meant to be running at like 30,000 RPMs, but when you run them at like 800, 1800, they tend to come apart or break.
Huh.
It's just because the threads to thread the brush onto the arbor is made out of the same material the brush is. So it's like if you over twist it, it just breaks.
Oh,
So,
geez.
yeah, so I just kind of put them on lightly and epoxy them together. But like I said, they're like $12. And I've used the brush research on someone else's machine, and it's the same result.
Huh.
And but I crash them like every other month, so I buy them by the 10 pack. They don't really mess anything up because it's just like hard plastic and rubber.
Right.
Because they're in a drill chuck, so they're like 4.5 inches lower than all my other tools. So if I forget to change it, like for usually if it's in slot 4, then it's tool 14. If I forget to change it, that I switched it out, I'll walk away and I just hear boom, and then the Z loads out, alarms out.
Oh my goodness.
That's one way to figure it out.
Yeah, that's the one time I'd like a probe for tool breakage detection. I just detect it to make sure the Z is set right.
Totally.
It's never been catastrophic, but like I already know those don't last me. They don't wear out. I break them regularly.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm looking at them right now. They do kind of look like a brush research.
Yeah, I use the white ones, the 120 grit ones,
Mm-hmm.
and like I said, the heads are like $10 and the arbors are like $2 to $6 depending on if you buy them on the big pack or not.
Hmm. That's really cool.
And yeah, they do a great job. I do them on stainless. I do them on aluminum. I do use them on aluminum very rarely, but I just do it to condition the surface from the face mill, and it softens the features a little bit of my holes and deburrs pretty well. I can't really complain for the 12, $13. I would like a brush research, but like 400 some dollars because the arbors are really expensive.
Yeah, they're not cheap. That's for sure.
And I know I'm gonna crash it because it's always my 11 tool.
So speaking of our listener questions, Built by Hutch also asked, how long does it take for your ideas to go from idea to finished product? And what are the steps or milestones in that process? And what's the easiest or hardest part of that?
Okay, sometimes it could take me 2 months to do something. Because if I get an idea when I don't have parts machined and like I have that whole month of period before I have parts again, which is not a great for business plan. But most knife makers are like that. Usually, like I plan to pretty much have a month where I make $0, unless I sell things that are my like the few items I have on inventory on my site, like keychain knives and stuff. And then the second month I'll make income for the 2 months. If I get hit in the period like that, ideas usually come and die. I'll have an idea of like, oh, I got to do it in a month. By the time I machine all these parts, and the month goes by, and I get bored of that idea, and I never do it. Or if I have parts, I tend to drop everything and have it done. But I'm very prone to working 36-hour shifts.
Jeez.
Um, like Payton, like people make fun of you in the machining community for like staying up late. Like I'm that guy in knife making industry. Like I've probably skipped out on 40 nights of sleep last year.
Dude, you
Oh my
can message
goodness.
me at 4 a.m. any day.
Like this is the first year where I've slept right in a while. Because so last year I did 13 knife shows, so I was on the road once or twice a month last year. And
Oh,
like the insider joke in our industry when they see me, it's like, so how many knives did you bring to the show? I'll be like 10, 15, and like most knife makers bring 5 or 6. And then like when'd you start? 5 days ago. When'd you
oh,
sleep? 5 days ago. That's like every show. It's like just don't talk to me for the first day. Just let me survive through this. Give me a lot of coffee, and then like I'll go to bed early and catch up on sleep. And the problem is the shows end at 6 p.m. and then from 6 to 4 a.m. everyone's drinking.
right.
Those
Like
shows are a toll. I do that same thing. Doing 13 of those, I couldn't imagine that.
No, well, the problem is it's not even the shows. It's what happens is I don't like I said I had a lot of stress when sales stopped in April because I've never experienced that in my life. I've been doing this for 9, 10 years, but I've been realistically full time doing it for like 7. Uh, like I don't really count that first year, but those shows are just like since things are always sold. If I make something, it just sells. Ideally, I should be making something and like putting one knife a month away each month, which is what a lot of guys do. But a lot of guys do 2 or 3 shows. I want to just travel because I met 2 friends that we were going to all the shows with, and it was really fun, and it gave me a chance to travel. But I didn't have any time to put away knives because I was going to a show once or twice a month. So I would have make my custom orders, and then they would ship out, and I'd have no inventory, and then the shows in like 10 days. And I'm like, well, I need the shows because the shows are cash, and I get to interact with people. They get to check out my knives. It's fun to talk to people, and you don't want to be that guy at the show with 1 or 2 knives and sell out the first moment and have nothing the rest of the day. And then it gets awkward. Usually the second day when you sell out the first day, the second day people come up. You get to talk to them, but like, hey, can I see your knives? And I'll pull up the knife in my pocket that's like 6 years old and beats crap, and I'll just shake their hand, hello. So I literally, it's pretty much that. The week before, I already know 7 days before the show, I'm going to sleep every other day. I'll work 36-hour shifts and go to bed every other day, and then try to catch up on sleep on either half the shows I drive to. It's about 10-hour drives to most of those shows, and half the shows I fly to, and those are the ones on the West Coast I fly to, and I get to try to sleep on the flight.
Wow. So, like, what about your micro dashi? How long did that take for you to go from idea to product?
So the idea with that was, so that actually got cloned last week. Someone told me that China cloned it, and it was pretty funny to me because I'm kind of done with that design. I made them 4 years ago. It was something to myself that I thought it was going to be the business plan when I first got the haas. I was like, I need to try to do something where I don't do any handwork on.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the dashi. So those I only sharpened by hand. Besides that, they were entirely machined. And I made 950 of those
Holy crap.
in about a month. I made big pallets. I thought that was going to be the thing. I make big pallets of everything. Quickly after that, I realized big pallets are very expensive. And when you got to make changes, like that doesn't, like my handles, I do 2 handles at a time. Like anytime I have to make a change, it takes a long setup time to make the fixtures, a lot of CAD work to do it. And you got to make a small change. And like usually every batch, I change something on them. It never made sense to do them. It was a good learning lesson, but I hated myself because all I did for a month was make those dashis. So it was like machine them all, swap them out. In between swapping them, I was essentially deburring for 2 weeks straight at a Scotch-Brite wheel. I went through a Scotch-Brite wheel in that whole deburring process. Usually I go through one a year, and it was just awful. I had no fun. I felt like a robot myself. I had the robot running, and I had myself acting as a robot, just off the Haas, run to the deburr wheel, deburr them flat, sand them back to the Haas, swap parts, and that was my life for a month. That was like never again. And they sold well. The first 300 kind of sold pretty fast. We're only going to sell so much of something at $65 a piece. And then the rest of the 600 kind of sold slowly over at least 4 years. And it was good to have an inventory product like that netted me a couple $100 a month here and there. So it's always kind of income. Like I'm down to the last 6, and now China cloned it. So I'm not gonna make more of them. I have some other designs in mind. Probably not gonna do 900. I'll probably do like 200-300 or something like that. Probably never gonna make 900 of anything ever again. But I wanted to try to mill the bevels, do the handles, essentially everything on it. I only sharpen them. The bearing is handwork, but there was no like features. Like my blades are machined on the mill, but I still have to hand grind all those bevels and facets and chamfers and everything.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
But that was the thing. Like that was one of those I'm gonna drop everything overnight idea. Like I get those very often. I used to have a really bad time sleeping because I pretty much gave myself narcolepsy. Well, the opposite of narcolepsy. Like I wouldn't go to bed. So I'd have an idea. I'd lay in bed. I'd look at the ceiling, and I just look in my own head. I'm like, "Fuck. Okay, I guess we're not sleeping tonight." I'll get up, go do CAD work, and at that point, like I'm machining it the next morning. Like that's it. It's either I make them the next day, because I can't stop thinking about it and I don't go to bed, or like I can't do this for a month and it doesn't happen.
That's literally my life.
Yes. You get it, Payton. Like literally, if I go to bed and I came up with an idea right before bed, that's it. I ain't sleeping that night.
That, or like
Thankfully,
you said,
COVID
you
fixed my
literally
sleep
can't
cycle.
get it out of your head.
No, I literally just look at the wall and like that's it. Like my sleeping environment's not quiet. I live in New York, so I'm used to like hearing the train at night, whatever it is. But if I have something in my head and I think I use the train and like the cars driving at 3 a.m. as an excuse not to sleep, even though it's never bothered me in my life because this is how I grew up. But that's it. I'll get up at 2 a.m. and I'll go sit at my computer and watch Netflix while doing CAD work. And the sun will rise up and I'll be like, should really try to get some sleep. And then now that the sun's been up for 3 hours, I'm like, I might as well just go to work. And I didn't sleep that night. And then I'm machining the parts.
Jeez.
Yeah, I tell you, what I do is not the smartest thing. I just get things done.
Hey, sometimes that could be the smartest way to do it.
What else we have? Questions? Can I open this?
So what's a workflow struggle that you have, and what are you doing to resolve it besides having enough machines?
Well, the workflow struggle I've had was always the 1 month income, then 1 month no income, and then those stagnant periods. And I think I just resolved that this week. Hopefully Friday I'll have that machine in here. So I think that's the answer to that one. Essentially, is buy the machine you need right away, or to do what you want to do, or essentially make sure you have enough income to drag you out every month. Is what it was for me. I was like, well, I can't buy the machine I want because I can't afford to. I couldn't get a VF2 because I knew I was going to move back to New York. Shop space is very limited here in New York. I knew 3-phase power is not going to happen. So I don't want to deal with a phase converter. And ground floor shops are very expensive. And I found a ground floor shop, but I only have a 7-foot lift gate. So the only option I could have is a Haas minimill or a Tormach. And I refused to buy a Tormach.
Fair enough.
Yeah, that
So
makes sense.
workflow struggle, I guess, not having enough tools to do what I want.
What about any shop superstitions?
Unfortunately, like the shop superstition is like, you gotta work. Like if you mess up a lot of stuff that day, you should go home. My thing is, if you go home that day, if you fucked up a lot, you're gonna have a bad week because you went home angry. I don't like going home angry. Like for me, it's like I have to go home and feel fulfilled.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely.
Like I can't, because then the drive home, I'll be angry, and then I probably won't go to bed because I'll be like, well, if I have a good day at work, I have to sit and do CAD work, so I feel like at least the day was progressive, and I'll go home and I'll go to work the next day like half awake.
Yeah. If I don't go to
Then
bed,
I'll miss up more things.
I was just gonna say, if I don't go to bed, like you said, being productive throughout the day, it's just like that was kind of a waste.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I used to feel, now not so much. COVID has helped me a lot out with this. Like I started playing Xbox for the first time in years, which I was very against video games because they were just a big time suck. But it's the only time that I could not think about work. Like you guys talked about it last episode. Like, oh no, not last episode. I just listened to it yesterday as well. The Grimsmo episode. Normal people don't understand what being always on really means. Like you're always on. Like if I'm sitting with my friends and they're like, yo, Nick, I'm like, oh, sorry, I was spacing out. I was doing some math in my head. And I was doing like the speeds and feeds, or like the stock comes in at 316, so I need to face off this much and this much, and like I'm always on, and my friends don't get it. And the only time I could actually turn off the brain is when I play like a fast paced first person shooter, or like even then, like back when I was younger, I would smoke weed to like shut off my brain and just watch TV. But these days, like I could smoke and work because I like, and that doesn't even help me shut off my brain. Now, if I smoke, I just think more about work, even more. Like it just, I don't know how to relax.
That's why I started skateboarding. Same thing.
Yeah, but like, I ride my bike, and during the summer, because I live on the boardwalk, like I get to the boardwalk and the beach by elevator. So the gyms are closed, and like I'm not a small guy, so like if I don't work out, I get really fat. So I have to do some sort of activity. And I would rock. So I'd walk on 3 miles on the boardwalk with my like a 40-pound backpack. And at first it started off just to clear my mind, but now all I do is think about shit. Like, okay, how do I design this? How do I do that? Like, even then, I'd ride my bike. I think about work. Skateboarding, when I was younger, I haven't done it in years, but like, I'd probably just think about work. I need something that occupies my mind entirely, and it has to be like the Call of Duty that came out recently. It's pretty fun. It's the first game I played in like 3 years, but it's too much of a fast-paced shooter, and you only have one life. So if you die, your team gets mad at you, so you have to constantly pay attention. And it helps me just like turn my brain off for an hour.
That's good. You got to have something like that. I mean, otherwise,
Yeah, it took me a little while to figure that one out. My friends are always like, "I don't like understand. Like, what do you mean you can't relax?" I'm like, "You guys, you don't get it. Like, I used to just smoke weed to relax. Now that doesn't work because I could be a proficient human when I smoke weed. And like, alcohol works, but like, I don't want to be an alcoholic.
yeah.
So that's the thing.
Running machines drinking either.
Oh, so the funny story was I used to drink regularly at the shop and smoke regularly at the shop because that was the environment I was in back in Jersey. And I was new to the machine, and they were having a barbecue, and I had like a drink or two, but we smoked, and I'm running the machine. I've never crashed my machine hard, but this is 2 weeks into having my machine, and I almost destroyed the entire goddamn thing. And after that, I didn't smoke weed at the machine for about a year. But I was jogging, manually jogging the 3-inch face mill without the spindle on. And I think I wanted to hit Z, but I hit jog lock and Z down at 100 inches a minute.
Oh.
And thankfully, it was all the way up, so there was like 10 inches of travel. And I just did some kung fu move and backhanded the e-stop button, and you couldn't even put a post-it note between the vise and the inserts. There was no like millisecond before. It was just perfect timing. It would have just straight crashed right into the spindle at 100 inches a minute without with the spindle idled. I would have probably broke my machine 2 weeks after getting it. And that morning, I was explaining to my parents how my biggest fear is that I burnt through all my cash. And if I kill the spindle quickly because of a big crash, like a spindle's $5,000, and I don't know what to do because I was leveraged to the hill at that point. And that same day, I was destroyed the entire head, and I was like, "No, that's it." Like I quit smoking weed for about a year at that point. I was like, "No, we're done."
Yeah, I don't blame you. That's crazy.
In the workflow. Question 6. That's kind of the same thing. Biggest upgrades or improvements in the workflow. Getting a second machine finally.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And the employee, like I said, my dad's been employed for a year. I've needed someone for a while. I do all the machining. He does all the finishing, the basic finishing. So like the sandblasting, the tumbling, the anodizing. He does all my assembly, and he starts the lock and detent, and then I finish tuning them because the lock and detent is kind of the bread and butter of why people buy my knives. It's like the grind quality is what you look at every maker, and the finish work, and then the lock and detent. Some guys don't like my knives and won't buy them because my lock and detent is too strong. It takes a lot of force to open my knives. Some guys love that. It's not for everybody.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty standard in the knife community in general. Like there's some knives that everybody loves, and some that or there. I don't think there are any knives that everybody loves. Like there are some knives that some people love, and some that they hate, and vice versa for other people.
And favorite chop snack, beef jerky and whiskey. It's cigars. Yeah, I have a very odd shop. Like there's like cigar ashtrays everywhere, and whiskey and beef jerky. I have visitors pretty regularly is the problem. But like the rule is like when visitors want to come over, it's like it can't be on a day where I'm grinding blades because that takes 100% of my focus.
That's fair.
I'll sit there and I do it once every other week. I hate it. Like I did it yesterday. I sat there for 12 hours and I ground blades all day. My hands looked like they went through a meat grinder. I have 3 giant like penny-sized blisters on my hands from friction and heat. Like that messes up my hands for a while, but also like I need 100% focus because if I mess up grinding a blade, I just lost out on a day's worth of work on that knife because it's the last thing I do on every knife. At that point, the handles are finished. Everything's machined. Lock and detent is set into, and heat treat's done. Everything is done. Once the knife is ground, it gets sharpened, and it's photos.
And it's all hand done. So that was one thing that Split asked: is it hand or is it jig? So it's all hand ground then.
So by hand grinding my blades, I'm using a jig.
Okay.
That used to be a controversial thing in our industry, just like CNC was.
Right.
But if I give a monkey a jig, they still can't grind the blade. It's not. It only helps because I don't grind one knife at a time like a lot of guys do. I'm grinding 10 to 15 to 20 knives at a time, which most knife makers, when I tell them that, they're like, how do you do that? I'm like, I just really hate myself. Um, it's not. It's a dirty process. It's really wearing on you. You got to wear a respirator the entire time. It kills your hands. It's just not fun. The end result is fun and beautiful, and it's very rewarding. But the process itself is horrible, in my opinion. Some guys like it, uh, but I do that on the jig. And again, I pre-machine my bevels a little bit, but like my dad could pre-grind those bevels if I wanted to. Anyone can. I spend all my time making sure that they're symmetrical from side to side, and especially the model I would make right now, the MK1. It's not a normal blade grind. It's compound ground with 6 bevels. So there's 6 different facets on that blade with 3 different grinder setups and grinding tools. And they have to be perfectly symmetrical from side to side, and that takes a while. At the very end, once I'm at the final thickness, I'll have to touch them up from side to side to make sure that, so there's pretty much 4 positions you have to look at. So there's the plunge line, which is by the handle area where the grind starts. When you look at the knife from edge towards your face, there will be this arc on either side, and that is the arc of your plunge line. Some guys don't look at that, but most seasoned makers who want their stuff to look good, that's like point number 1 for a good grind. Is if your plunge line starts at the same point. It's probably the hardest thing to do in a knife, is to have a sweeping plunge that's even on both sides. And I usually don't look at that until the very end, and then I manually grind in and what I call feather in and draw in the plunge lines at the end. Then there's the tips from side to side, the swedges from side to side, where they start and end. And on the compound grind specifically, where the hollow grind meets the flat grind, it makes this very aesthetically appeasing arc. Aesthetic arc. And now a lot of guys that grind those, they don't look at that arc as much. But that's like my biggest pet peeve in my knives, is that very specific arc from side to side, and that takes a while. Sometimes I could grind the blade in 20 minutes. Sometimes it's not. It's that knife is just not not cooperating, and it could take 2 hours. It's that's just how it is. If I'm having issues matching them up, and I'm matching side 2 to side 1, and then I overshoot side 2, then I got to go match side 1 back up to side 2, and I overshoot side 1, and then back and forth, and sometimes it just happens.
That's crazy. Very labor intensive.
Yeah. I'm like I said, I'm trying to set up grinding in the mill, and I think I'll still hand grind blades, but it'll be a different price tier. Like right now, I'm milling bevels with that step pattern, like you see on Grimsmill is the Norseman.
Mm-hmm.
It's just in a different fashion. I like it, but I also don't like it. And a lot of customers, it's kind of still also 50-50. And it's very hard to do both milled and not milled bevel on the same model. It adds more options to the pre-order. It adds more things that I have to do at stage 1 if I'm doing it on the same model. And it looks a little weird on pricing, because it's very hard to price when you do both of them, because milling bevels is very easy. It doesn't take much work. I have to use more stock because I need to add extra tabs to support the thin edge. There's more chance of scrapping it at heat treat, because the heat treating something that thin, but the time savings, doesn't matter. And again, it's something that I'm also a handmade maker. When you start milling your bevels in the machine, you're looked at a little bit differently as a knife maker, at least in my opinion and knife makers' opinions. Some customers like the traditional aspect, but I'm already half CNC as it is. I'd like to grind the bevels to make them look like a hand ground blade at least. So, and I'll just hand grind the more complex grinds, like my compound grinds or something.
Makes sense. Yeah.
And then for sharpening, I use a wicked edge sharpener. It's essentially a fixed angle sharpener that uses diamond stones.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason I don't do it on the grinder is, well, it's not that I can't, it's that it's just better. One, it feels sharper because it's more of a V grind. And when you do it on the grinder, you get this micro convex that looks like a apple seed, if you would think. And it's just not as sharp, in my opinion. And it's also harder to resharpen. So if a customer actually uses your knife, which is only 10% of customers, when they want to resharpen it themselves, they usually have these fixed angle setups, like a wicked edge or something along those lines. And if you sharpen it on the grinder, they have to sit there and fully reprofile your edge and take off a lot of metal to get it sharp again.
That makes
So,
sense.
so if I start with the wicked edge, they just have to touch it up because it's already a true flat. And then sometimes they'll message me like, "Hey, I want to resharpen this on a wicked edge. What angle do you use?" And I'll just tell them 20 degrees, so they could get the exact angle right away.
That sounds like a good system. Yeah.
It's a little pricey and it's a little labor intensive because my dad can't do it. He can. I have to do it because if he slips at all, you're sharpening a knife that's fully finished and diamond grit, and if you slip and scratch the blade, I have to regrind everything.
Ugh.
And if it's too deep and the edge is too thin, I can't even regrind it. Like if you slip with a 100 grit, it's a scrap blade pretty much,
Jeez.
depending on where you slip on. Yeah, so I don't have him do it, and it's also very hard to figure out when the knife is actually sharp. What they call a zero edge once it actually meets both sides. And if you keep sharpening it, you start to do it starts to give a recurve effect because now you're actually reducing and changing the profile, and then it looks ugly and unprofessional.
That's a
So
ton. Well, good on
yeah,
you.
it's my least favorite thing. I don't like grinding stuff, but grinding is rewarding. Sharpening is the very last step, and it's a quick process with a really fast fuck up factor. Because like if you fuck up grinding stuff, you could just kind of reshape it as long as you have enough meat there and it match up the other side. Just adds more time. If you fuck up sharpening, you probably just fucked up that blade.
Yikes. One thing else that Split asked was, and you kind of touched on this, but how do you prep your raw materials? So do you get everything double disc and surface ground, or lapped, or what have you?
Um, Kind of a mix of things. It's also unconventional because I would love everything double this ground. It helps you in the long run if you could afford it. If you could afford it, and you could also afford the time, double this grind everything. It'll help you a lot. It'll make sure your knives are centered. It'll make sure you don't have the warping like I have when I face my titanium. I usually have to straighten out all my titanium parts. I'll assemble the knives, and 3 out of 4 times the knife is off center. And it's a little weird when I have to describe all this stuff because I know I'm not talking to the knife industry as much here, but I think it matters because it's the mechanics. So when the knife is closed and you look at the tip between the handle slabs, it won't sit center. And that's one of the first things customers look at. So a lot of customers have very high OCD factors, and a lot of times a customer will sell a knife instantly if a knife is not centered because it bothers them so much. And I would have to sit there and bend my frames and put it back together and then see if it's center. And it is what it is. Even if parts are water jet, double disc and flat, you might have a knife that is off center, and you might have to intentionally bend your frames to make it center because your pivot hole might not be exactly 90. Knives are actually insanely high precision products, and you look at production knives and you start breaking them apart for tolerances, and you start realizing how much slop is in them to get them to work. When you try to make a really high precision knife, like what I do, what Grimsmo does, it's actually very hard because you start teetering this very fine window of having everything work super smoothly and things binding up. And I had a lot of issues with binding up when I first started making knives because I was trying to keep too tight of a tolerance. It took me about a year and a half to figure out that I'm being a little bit too OCD about my stuff.
Huh.
I used to have a lot of issues because I was trying to be super tight on my tolerances.
Makes sense.
The biggest thing was trusting in my supplier's parts.
Oh, gotcha. So are you using what pivots that are outside?
So I'm using pivots that are guaranteed to be like 3/10 concentric.
Okay.
But I don't find them to be 3/10 concentric. So if I try to make a really tight counterbore to that pivot screw, sometimes it's okay, and then sometimes in the rotation it'll bind, and then I'll swap it out into a different one, and it works.
Oh,
But
wow.
it takes a little while to. I did it at that time. That wasn't the first thing I did because there's a process of orders. You start eliminating factors. that wasn't always the first factor because there's usually issues that were on my end prior. And it took me a little while to figure out, oh, I'm trying to achieve too tight of a tolerance. Some of these parts just tend to bind and they need a little bit more slop to work right. I was kind of fighting myself there. It took me a little while to realize this. It took me about a year and a half, and it actually came from an advice from someone who wasn't a CNC machinist. It was from just a long-time custom knife maker. He's like, dude, your knives. We did a collab together, and he was working with my parts, and he was just like, dude, your knives are a little bit, the tolerances are a little too tight.
That's pretty funny.
Which the machinists like you guys are like, what? Tolerances can never be too tight. And I'm like, oh, they could be a little too tight.
Definitely, yeah.
Well, that wraps up the questions we have. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about? Or, I mean, we usually give everybody that comes on a little bit of time at the end to kind of plug your website and your Instagram and all that stuff too.
So it was a question I had for Payton about the Lego stuff. Just how'd you get into Legos? Because I still think to this day it's a really weird. Like he's one of the only guys that does it, and it's just kind of a weird like route to find. And like, because he did it young. Because like I said before we started, I'm like, I'm pretty sure me and Payton used to talk back in the day when he still had his TAG set up. But he was just, I don't know. It's just a very weird. Like knives are a really weird industry. Like I make not custom high end knives, but I think Legos are even weirder, especially because he does it in a home shop, and Legos are always this high production Lego conglomerate company that's done overseas.
Well, I guess my argument or counter to that is, I mean, knives are kind of the same way, right? Everyone's a collector of something. And just at a young age, I think every kid at least had touched a Lego brick at one point in their life. So just kind of stuck from there.
But did you see anyone else doing like? Because when I first saw you do this, I've looked. I just googled it because, like I said, I like to observe everyone's industry and understand it. So when I saw you do custom Legos, I remember googling like who would be your competitors because it's just something I do. I'm a weird person, uh, and I couldn't really find anybody doing it. And like when you were young doing it, I thought it was really interesting that like you found this niche thing that like everyone knows what a Lego is. And now, obviously, in knives, like there's high end everything. You could buy a $2,000 belt. There's high end watches. So that one wasn't as crazy when I put it to people that way. When you compare a G-Shock and a Rolex, you're not making custom high end Legos. You're just making Legos that Lego isn't making, essentially. And like that one, when you saw that, I was like, I couldn't really find anyone else that does it.
I mean, I would say there are some of the products I make that are high end, and yeah, Lego doesn't make them, but I mean, I would like to think my stuff's pretty high quality compared to. I mean, there are competitors out there. I'm not the only one doing this.
But I was saying when you started, there were competitors.
I mean, at the time there were people doing it, but not to the extent there is now. There's a lot more people doing what I do.
Yeah, I think that's all social media though, because even knives, there's a lot more people making knives at the moment it got popular on Instagram.
Yeah, but I mean, compared to some of these other competitors, they're all sending stuff to China, and I'm keeping it in house. So I would like to think that, and you can compare products and just see, between molded parts. I would like to think my standards are a lot higher than some of these other guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you talk about the flashing and stuff like that. I think you were talking about specifically the AirPods cases
Yeah,
of how impressed you were with them. And next time I held AirPods, I looked at I really heavily inspected the AirPods cases. So kind of just like trying to see like, okay, like they're probably molded like this and this and this. That's just what I've always, I don't know. It's kind of a thing like a force of habit that I do when I see things. I'm like, how was this made? Was it molded? Was it machined or whatever it is? And now the more I listen to your podcast and the more you talk about molding, because I didn't really understand molding much prior. And now when I see plastic parts, I always try to see where the injection flows in, where the seams are. Like every little aspect of it now, like I'm like, oh, okay, this is how this is done. This is how it's overmolded and stuff like that.
that is modern society.
Yeah, no, it was just interesting to me when you were doing the Legos. I was like, I wonder how you got into Lego specifically. Like he's like, oh, like this could be done in a small quantity, like injection molding.
Yeah, I mean, it just started from a passion, and I've talked about it before in some earlier podcasts, I think, and some other interviews and stuff. And it's just started from a passion, and then my passion for history, and put the two together and bada boom.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and also good questions. Another machine I recently got because he was talking about prep work. I did get a surface grinder.
Oh, nice.
I never really answered that question that he had. I just think about it now. So I got a surface grinder like 2 weeks ago. I just got the 3-phase powered for it. I don't know how to run it in theory. I've only ran like so. Knife makers do this horrible thing where they buy precision equipment and they Frankenstein it to be easier to run and not as precise. Like they'll take surface grinders and take off the wheel and put a rubber wheel on and run it with like 2x72 belts.
I just saw somebody do that on Instagram the other day, and I was wondering.
Yeah, most knife makers do this, and they do it with a lot of machines. Like they take precision equipment and make it not precise. And I never liked the finish it gave because you get like what will be a belt bump where the seam is on the belt. It'll bump and leave you a little micro gouge, and you would have to take a file and sand off the grit in that area, and it just never left a good finish that I liked unless you were going to a super high grit. But even then, so I finally got it, but I don't know exactly how to surface grind well. I don't know. I've never surface ground with a stone, even manually. I've only used those converted grinders. So I got to figure out how to use that because it's always my biggest bottleneck. I think that I have, besides not having parts for a month because of that stagnant period, is when I start a new batch. It's like, oh, crap. How do I prep the steel to get it to 5/32 exactly? Because I never had a surface grinder. I didn't double disc grind because it takes about a month turnaround time. I was barely. I already have a month in my process that has been killing me. I would always send it out, and it's very expensive to get that stuff done because there's a local shop that did it. It was fast, but it was pretty expensive. So now I'm finally bringing that in house, and I would surface grind them and then lap them by hand on a sandpaper and just a granite surface plate. But
Awesome.
surface grinder should help with that.
Yeah, that should really speed you up.
Yeah, I didn't mean to go backtrack, but I just I really forgot that I got that surface grinder because it's been hell trying to get this new haas in the shop. Working with brokers isn't the easiest thing right now with Labor Day and COVID, and then we had the hurricane was going through. The house should have been here last week. They sent the wrong truck. I think I should mention that because if anyone's trying to move machines themselves, well, not themselves, but you're buying used machinery, and the seller isn't a dealer, so you have to uh, do all the shipping yourself and organize all that yourself. Don't assume the brokers know what they're doing. Like this is the first time I had to move my own piece of big machinery, except the surface grinder, but that was in Connecticut. It was like anything 4 hours away. My mechanic does the moving for me on his flatbed. He drives up to 4 hours, so that way he could do it in 1 day shift.
Wow.
So this is the first machine that I had to move myself. That was 9.5 hours away. The last CNC was taken care of. The dealer had it shipped to me. So I didn't ask enough questions. I just told him like I need air ride. It has to get strapped down and it has to get tarped. That's all I told him. I'm like, it'll be loaded with a forklift. There'll be a forklift on site on both locations. And like I explained to him the machine. They asked for the model number, what year it is, all the dimensions. So I'm like, and that same broker moved the Haas, a Herco VM1 for my buddy from Missouri to Texas, I believe. And so I call him, I tell him what I need, and the truck shows up, and he pretty much sent a box truck, like a heavy haul air ride box truck to move this machine. And there's no way to strap things to the floor in the box truck. And they wanted to strap it to the sides of the box on aluminum railing. For 4,000-pound Haas, if that machine starts tilting and it's driving through the mountains to get to New York, that machine tilts at all, it's going to rip the entire box off the truck. Now, you get $1 million at least this broker and that shipping company provided $1 million in insurance. But what if it goes rolling down the highway and kills 25 people? I told the guy's like, no, it'll be fine. I'm like I can't like consciously let this guy bring this machine here. I need this machine, but like that is not safe.
Yeah, totally. They needed to do it right.
Yeah, and I was just a little shocked that he sent that. And I was like I told him like now like I went down to the T. I'm like I need a tarp. I even measured what tarp it will take to cover the machine because I have the same machine. I was like, the tarp needs to be this big, or they need whatever 2 tarps, so that way there's no miscommunication because it's coming from a private seller, and like they had to. I probably inconvenienced that guy for an hour or two that day, and like he runs a shop with 15 hosses and like 12 employees, I think. And like I just inconvenienced that guy for a day or two, and he was okay. He was okay. He didn't seem mad, but like I felt like an asshole for about 2 days. And so if anyone's ever moving information, it doesn't matter. Don't assume that the broker who specializes in this job and the shipper knows what they're doing, especially during COVID and people are just hungry for some money.
For sure. Well, hey, Nick, thanks for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Go ahead and plug your Instagram and your website and anything you got coming up product-wise.
So, working on a new batch of stuff. Trying to retire the model I'm working on now. Working on another model. Again, you guys are mainly machinists. Besides that, the most exciting thing is now that I have an R&D machine, I could finally try to do a production model that I've always wanted to do and figure out on this new machine. And you could find me at NCCKnives on Instagram or on my website, NCCKnives.com. Feel free to ask me any questions. I wanted to get on the podcast, talk to you guys, wanted to nerd out a little bit with machinists. And you guys have always talked to really seasoned machinists, but never anyone that was kind of like, I'm half-assing it and just making it work. So I just thought it would be an interesting perspective.
Totally. We really appreciate you taking the time and coming on.
Thank you. It's great talking to you guys.
Awesome. Well, we'll see you guys next week with Dylan and I.